Welcome. This is Live with Search Engine Land. I'm Ginny Marvin, Editor-in-Chief of Search Engine Land, and today I'm joined by my colleagues Barry Schwartz, Greg Sterling, and George Nguyen. We are all on the editorial team at Search Engine Land, and today we are going to be kind of taking a look back at the past several months. So we started Live with Search Engine Land with our first episode on March 23rd in response to all the changes that we were all experiencing. And in a sense, it's interesting to look back at the episodes that kind of function as a sort of time capsule of the emotional, mental, logistical, financial turbulence of this time. And of course, there wasn't just the pandemic. There were many other major events and changes that marketers have been grappling with. We've got privacy and data restrictions, antitrust, misinformation, and brand safety concerns. And of course, the Black Lives Matter movement has raised awareness that we have a lot of work to do in our own industry and within our organizations. So today we're going to look back, reflect on what's happened, what we've learned, and then we're going to take a sort of prescient look forward and talk about where we think things are going to be headed. So as we go along, thank you so much for joining us. If you do have questions along the way, just pop those in the chat box, and we'll get to those as well. So let's dive in. First, I'm just going to go over some of the quick stats that have stood out. And Barry, Greg, and George, feel free to pop in at any point. So I was looking back, and Barry, on March 9th, you wrote an article about Google My Business, notifying local businesses that it's time, they really should be thinking about updating their hours. This was sort of as things started to really be taken seriously in the US. March 10th, I wrote a story about how coronavirus was disrupting search and digital ad budgets. And then, of course, March 11th is sort of the day that we all remember of that evening when all the there's sort of this convergence of awareness with Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson saying they had tested positive. The NBA announced it was suspending its season. There's a travel ban from the EU was announced that day. And so, there was sort of this, felt like everything had been kind of moving in this direction, and suddenly, bam, the world had really kind of changed for us. So, and it affected both small businesses, and also, you had YouTube later that week saying that more videos would be reviewed by machines due to staffing shortages as everyone started working from home. And some of the things that stood out to me, we had travel advertisers had cut media spend by 62% those first couple of weeks in March compared to February, according to Media Radar. And it wasn't just travel. Obviously, there was higher ed, car dealerships, event venues, restaurants. And meanwhile, it was sort of a world of haves or have-nots. And CPG and e-commerce, we continue to see seeing the benefits there. Facebook did a study. They've now got two, what they're calling waves of these. At the end of the first wave, they did a survey, and that globally, 26% of small businesses were closed at the end of May, globally. 18% were still closed at the end of June. And of course, then we had, earlier on, we had Amazon stopped accepting non-essential items, and we had just massive ripple effects with manufacturing supply chains and inventory supply challenges. And so I'll wrap up this sort of look at some of the stats. US e-commerce sales are expected to increase by 18% this year, which is sizable, according to eMarketers, and that would put e-commerce at around 14.5% of total U.S. retail sales. And if you take out fuel and auto purchases, that puts e-commerce at closer to 20%. And even with that massive growth, we're not going to see it offset the loss in physical retail sales, and overall retail is expected to drop by 10.5%. So we're seeing massive impact. And Angelique, she asked if I will have this provided at the end of the meeting. Yes, we'll write this up on Search Engine Land. So I'll be sure to capture those. Any other stats stand out to you, George, Greg, or Barry?
Well, I mean, I think in the e-commerce category, the growth was really massive, in triple digits in some areas. There were millions of new e-commerce shoppers. One stat that I kind of continue to repeat to people is that Target said they had 5 million new online shoppers, people who were in-store shoppers that bought something for the first time online. And about 40% of those people picked up their product in the store. So that sort of is a little interesting case in point about the evolution of online shopping. We saw a really massive spike in the growth of buy online, pick up in store, as I was just sort of saying a minute ago. So some interesting stuff there. And then to just to reinforce the point that you made, Ginny, about all the business closures. I mean, I think there are a lot of numbers floating around, but some of the more recent Yelp numbers are really scary about the number of businesses that are permanently closed, especially restaurants. So it's we're in a time of really sort of precariousness from a small business standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, the Yelp number, I think, was 60% of the restaurants on Yelp now that were closed as of March, whatever, are permanently closed. Now, that's not necessarily representative of the whole world, but it's a pretty scary number directionally.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side of that, I noticed one of the things that jumped out to me was the Q1 earnings for Shopify. I mean, Shopify is just one platform, but when you have a company that went 47% of an increase year over year during this period, it just seems to be a clear signal that during that initial period where everybody's just scrambling to find a way to get online, and a lot of people have said, COVID is what's responsible for digital transformation. I believe that's very true, and people had to scramble to find a new way to do that. That earnings statement by Shopify is just an indicator of that, and that really jumped out to me, which is actually what kind of spurred the idea for our own Shopify and our own Shopify SEO guide and things like that later on.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to talk about winners in this landscape, Shopify is clearly one of them, and obviously from a just benefiting from the overall boost in e-commerce, but we're also seeing them really dig in with their integrations with Facebook and Google. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but part of that digital transformation was you've got Satya Nadella when he said on their Microsoft's Q1 that they saw more faster digital transformation in 2 months than they'd seen in 2 years. And we've got Facebook sped up, Facebook Shops. You've got Google rolling out free listings in both of those faster in response to demand, e-com demand in the wake of COVID. And Shopify is sitting there as a hub to both of those, right? So those integrations are just simplifying all of that and putting Shopify essentially in the center of these two potentially massive, Facebook Shops is still somewhat untested, but certainly has massive potential, ecosystems. So yeah, I think you're right, George. I mean, Shopify is just extremely well positioned.
Right. And then on like a personal level, if you think about it, it's like you look back at Apple's earnings and they were way up, and they said one of the reasons were that people were buying devices for their homes. So for a lot of us, I mean, most of my coworkers here work from home already, but I had to make the transition from working from my office to working from home, which I used to just live in my office, and now I work from home all the time. Our last day in our office was like, I think like March 9th or March 10th, if I remember correctly. And I basically told everybody, hey, you know what? You could work from home, get on the VPN and work from home. And transitioning for most people has been, I remember on the first XMX live we did, or Search Engine Live we did, was like talking about with, Daniel Weisberg and different people about how they transitioned from working from the office to working from home. And I don't know what percentage of the I guess SEO, SEM community is a work from home community versus, a work from office community. But there are a lot of people who had to make that transition, and it wasn't so easy for a bunch of people. So it's just that just kind of stood out for me. Like, it makes sense that Apple, earnings went up because of that, because people had to buy a lot of stuff. I saw a lot of Googlers saying, "Oh, look all the stuff I got in the mail, lighting, and how you have to do all these videos from home, microphones and new video cameras, webcams."
Yeah. So just kind of thinking back, so work from home obviously was a big impact for a lot of us. If we just look back and think about sort of like one thing that really stood out to you in the moment, then Barry, if you want to go first, if you have anything more to add on that.
Yeah, I mean, so work from home was one of the big things. Before that, even when I was like, we were going out to XMX West in February, I think it was like the third week in February or second week in February, and like, it wasn't so comfortable. What I started buying on Amazon was all the hand sanitizer and like masks, whatever I could get. And that was like before the big rush. So I had all this stuff with me, and it went to XMX West, and kind of your travel. My first time my travel was impacted. I was worried about who I'm sitting next to, who I'm going to shake hands with at the conferences. Are there going to be conferences in the future? So a lot of those things were like, okay. And then that transition to like ordering everything online. So I was, my wife usually goes out and goes to the supermarket and buys stuff, and we didn't really have that. And ever since, now we just it's transitioning to ordering online. Although in New York, it kind of calmed down here significantly. New York was like scary. People were dropping, literally getting sick all around me. It was pretty crazy here. People in my community across the street literally were getting sick. I was getting emails from our synagogue about pray for this person, pray for that person. And unfortunately, I know a lot of people who passed away. So it wasn't just like, oh, this is happening in the world. Like you saw when it was happening in China in December and January, like, oh, it's somewhere else. But like when it hits you and people, it was pretty crazy. And talking to different people there, it was pretty scary to see that. And then I run a company, and of course, a lot of people work for companies, and keeping the employee morale up by not being in the office and doing things remotely was a whole other challenge by itself. So it was a pretty interesting time. And looking back at it like several months later, it's still been very interesting.
Yeah.
The work from home piece is going to be one of the long-term cultural shifts that we all experience. I mean, there are a lot of companies now that have given their employees the ability to work from home indefinitely. That'll have an impact on where jobs are located. It's definitely a different way to work. I mean, certain things are more efficient, certain things are less efficient. Many people are experiencing a lot more stress and a lot more, kind of round the clock hours than they did. I mean, in technology, there's a lot of that anyway, but I think there's a lot of emotional impacts in working from home, depending upon who you are in your company, that are challenging for employers to deal with, and for marketers, group.
Well, and I agree with that. And I think that I think that there's a lot to learn there. I think that if we look back at how people were working in those first months, everything was really, not only were you working from home for the first time, potentially, but you had potentially children at home, or roommates at home, or a spouse or partner at home. And so you're now, and adding pets and whatever, plus figuring out communication, plus figuring out secure communication, plus figuring out, whether you had, have you transitioned to the cloud? I mean, really things that a lot of us take for granted if we've been working remote for a long time, but it wasn't just normal work from home or work remote. It was work remote plus 15 different other compounding, plus the anxiety of a pandemic that just made everything so so much more abnormal. So I wonder, Greg, to your point about that this is going to be a long-term thing. What I'm getting at here is, are we going to be taking the real lessons on how to make, what the impact of working remote or working from home or working in, whether it's different satellite offices, our company is going to be able to step back and look at what does this look like from a real world non-pandemic standpoint, and does this make sense, whether it's a hybrid or whatever, to have more flexibility from a work perspective.
Is that a question, Ginny?
Yes, to you or anyone.
Well, I mean, I think that the answer is yes. I mean, this will change options both from I mean, there are a lot of cultural impacts, but where people can live, they don't have to live in high cost cities anymore to work at some of these companies, and the companies will appreciate them living in places where they can pay them less. I think I think
I don't know about that. Do you think, I saw some surveys, like, do you think if Google's going to change their salaries based on if people were hired to work in San Francisco and they decide to move?
No, they're not going to reduce people's salaries, but they're going to hire new people in lower cost places and pay them less.
That's another question. Are they? I mean, when I know Google said July, they're going to open up their office or something, June or July of 2021. Are things going to go back to normal? For me, I really see when it's safe again to go back to the office. Now I could see my cameras in my office building. I have the outdoor job. People are moving around a lot, not in my office, but the other tenants in the other spaces next to my office. It looks like business as usual. Will people go back to normal? I expect my employees to go back to my office when it's safe.
I'll tell you anecdotally. So I live in Portland, Maine, and the housing market here has been through the roof, because people who are in New York, in Boston, who, there is, we generally have people who move up here, they've reached a certain point in their career and they're able to either reestablish their businesses here or they telecommute or whatever. But now that that tether is theoretically gone for potentially infinite amount of time, they are buying like crazy. And so I think that there will be
scared to be in New York, so they were leaving.
Well,
yeah, but there's also the idea that you can be in a place, you don't have to be in New York, right? So if you love New York, that's great. But if you don't love New York, you can work for the New York firm and be in Portland, Maine.
Yeah. And so it's these people that either had, they've spent a couple weeks here, they've spent summers, and they've always had this dream of, we'd love to have the live that lifestyle. And now it doesn't have to be Maine. It can be Austin. It can be, Omaha. It can be Chicago or Detroit. I do think that there are potential long-term impact from a satellite sort of office standpoint. And we don't need to go too far down this road, but from a future of work and what hiring and management looks like, I do think that there are going to be smart, long-term, beneficial impact for more of the country.
But it's also very difficult to manage remote teams, and it's also difficult to collaborate in remote teams. There are certain benefits. I mean, we hear all these stories about, like, I mean, there's the stories about the Pixar offices in California, or the new Apple spaceship headquarters are designed to some degree to promote serendipitous interaction, where people are face to face and they can have meetings and they can encounter each other and ideas come out of that. So that's not as possible when you've got, or not possible in the same way when you've got a remote workforce. I want to say two quick things.
Yeah.
Your use of the phrase telecommute, Ginny, is kind of an archaism.
Very, very 2000s.
Well, people aren't going to be telecommuting anymore, because they don't speak on, people don't. One of the interesting things is I don't talk on the phone anymore. I just do meetings on Zoom or Google Meet. I mean, very rarely do I talk on the phone. I used to do all these calls on the phone. That's less and less and less.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to say is you neglected to use the phrase suburban dream lifestyle, which you had the opportunity to use in connection with Portland, Maine.
I am not suburban though. I'm small city.
Compared to New York.
Yeah, well, it's like, yeah, anyway, we don't need to go down the road, but yes.
I want to add something. I also want to remark on Craig's ability to say so many things in so few words right there. That was a packed statement, Craig. But in the first few, maybe like the first month of Live with Search Engine Land, when we were doing our first few sessions, the resounding consensus between a lot of panelists, especially in B2B, was that this work from home environment just was pushing the buying cycle and compressing it in a way where people were just getting things done a lot quicker. And so I think that the company, the culture, or the culture of the company that the company is trying to create is going to be super important in determining whether people will continue to work from home. Obviously, Barry wants everybody kind of in office at his company, but it's going to be impossible to turn away from some of these advantages. And if you're just somebody that is like a social media manager and all of your duties can be done from home, not that there's anything wrong with that or anything, but if you're somebody whose job is very convenient for working from home, there's that.
We have been working from home.
Right.
Our entire company has been natively remote.
But for people who might be opposed to it after having this exposure and seeing the other benefits, I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult to just kind of turn away from.
Yeah.
So I'm in that situation. I'm the type of company that I only hire people that would actually work in my office. And they had the ability to work from home if they needed to. That's why it was very easy for me to say one day, everybody go home and work from home, use the VPN, we have it. It's been used. People could work from home whenever they need to. But honestly, still looking at it, I still think things would be better for the employee morale, for creativity and so forth.
Yeah, I think there are absolutely sectors. I think software dev. I think there are sectors that are or teams even within companies that are going to be better remote. Sam has a good question about blended setups, and seems like there may be more disconnects whenever you have part of a team in an office and otherwise remote. I think there is massive money to be had for all the consultants that are going to be out there pushing new management under remote and blended workforce setups. There's that. But two, I think, Sam, that's a really good point. It's one of the things that I do think, from a third door perspective, because our company is completely remote, everyone's in the same position and no one's getting left out of the meeting or being forgotten to get dialed in. And so, from a management standpoint, I think there has to be new processes and accountability built into how companies are going to work if you're going to do a blended setup, because there definitely are pros and cons to that.
I mean, I think over the next year, we're going to see books and, as you say, consultants and a lot of quote unquote learnings from this initial period about how to do this. I mean, I think there is a lot of, I've seen surveys that talk about a lot of negative impacts that people, experience, isolation, burnout, things like that. But some people are really loving it and getting a lot of things done. So there's no sort of uniform conclusion or answer to be drawn from this so far, I don't think.
Yeah. I think onboarding becomes sort of the biggest challenge and sort of unproven testing ground, I think, in this phase. So, all right, let's move on. So we've been running these sessions for many months now, since March 23rd, I think we said. And so what are some of the quotes or takeaways or thoughts that have stuck with you, or that you think are sort of emblematic of either that time or are good takeaways to keep thinking about as we move into whatever this future holds. So Barry, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I mean, I did like the first video, so I think it was like just segues nice to what we're talking about before. I remember Daniel Weisberg from Google. He's working in the Google Tel Aviv office, and he was shut down. And he's like saying things like the work-life balance thing is all off for him. He's basically worked all the time, 24/7. Whenever he was awake, he was just working. He found himself all sorts of hours working. He said things like, he's basically said, I think the quote was, "You're bored. Why not do some work? I have things to do, so just do it." And he said it's kind of blurring the weekdays. Remember, like now we joke around about what day is it. Like he was like probably one of the first persons to just actually say that. It was like his whole entire weekday, weekend, what day is it, was all blurred. He didn't know what was flying, and that was hard for a lot of people who, haven't worked from home in general, because it was just like the same thing. You wake up, you're by your computer, and so forth. I think Lily Ray is like, she took a more disciplined approach, and as she works in New York City, and she basically went ahead and said, I'm going to keep my work day as clear as possible. So I'll work from home, but my work hours going to be my work hours. But then when she wanted to get outside, I think she's like, in New York City, everybody's like running on the same track. You're all next to each other. You really couldn't go anywhere. It was just a dangerous place to be at that time. Alexa Sander was on that call, I believe. She said she missed her Disney World vacation. And Pedro Diaz, who was a former Googler who now runs his own SEO consulting firm in Brazil, said he was terrified to pretty much go outside. All he did was drive his wife to work and never left his car. And that was early on, and Brazil was pretty fine back then. So I think a lot of people early on were like mostly like having mental, psychological issues, as well, just like dealing with the whole thing was just very, very scary for people very early on.
Yeah. George, what about you?
One of the things that jumped out at me, because I'm not super in tune with the e-commerce side of things, or it wasn't at the time, and now I am a little bit more, but Tony Very, I'm not sure if I'm saying his last name correctly.
Very, yeah.
Yes, VP of e-commerce at the Integer Group, said what we found is that brands that go dark during recession or a depression or even crisis type periods have a very difficult time climbing back up the mountain once things begin to normalize. And the gut reaction, especially I imagine for a small business owner, might be more emotional. It might be like, hey, we need to save money wherever we can. And marketing is kind of a convenient place to do that, because you might think that you're able to still bring in revenue from whatever other source your sales. But if you go dark during these times, everybody else that isn't is kind of just inching ahead of you. And so when it's time to resume your business, if you're fortunate enough to be in a position to do that, it feels like you're rolling a ball up a hill, but you're starting at the bottom again. And that's definitely something that stuck out to me initially there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was pretty much the consensus on that session on digital commerce is if you can, you should keep going. And that, yeah, there are all, many studies on that. I think one of the challenges with this time around was there were, so many challenges on the supply side that people would have loved to be advertising, but didn't have any inventory to advertise, or couldn't get their stuff into Amazon to promote. And so that, I think, was something that people really hadn't had to grapple with on a massive scale. You've got product outages here and there typically, but to have it sort of widespread really, I think, was something that many marketers had not had to address. Yeah.
Right. That supply chain issue was just immense. And also, you have that with people jumping onto Shopify. You might have something to sell, but with the mail system being the way it is, especially right now at this particular time, it becomes even more complicated. You might resume your marketing, but now you have all these other factors. And now we're in this whole new situation that is different than we were 5 months ago, 4 months ago.
One of the things that struck me, I did a session on brand marketing, brand versus performance, because a lot of marketers were pulling their brand budgets and pushing them into lower funnel performance-based marketing. And there was a kind of consensus. Amy Bishop and Michelle Morgan were the and then we had a third speaker who was a substitute at the last minute, whose name I can't remember, but that's okay. Too much work from home stress. Anyway, they were talking about the need to maintain sort of brand and awareness marketing, but but they were seeing people shift away from that just because they were getting pressure to be more accountable, you know, by their CMOs or whomever. And I mean, I think that's a mistake. It goes to George's point about, you know, sort of disappearing. It's not quite as drastic as that, but you know, the market got much noisier, I think, in a weird sort of way. Paradoxically, there's all this content marketing, and people are saying all kinds of different things and throwing white papers at you and, you know, blog posts. But suddenly during this time, we had everybody saying more or less the same things about coronavirus and the top 3 things you need to do and how you need to be empathetic and authentic, and everybody was saying the identical thing. That's not brand versus performance, but it's to me, it speaks to what differentiates marketers in a kind of period like this. And I think it's, you know, can be a pricing proposition, but it's ultimately, I think, brand that is the differentiator in the end.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think I don't know, Michelle Morgan was talking about this, that they actually were able to get a client to think more top of funnel and invest in top of funnel during this time. And with the argument that you're going to come out stronger with having a stronger defined brand presence during this time. So yeah, right.
Well, sales. Sorry, Barry. I'll just follow up on that.
Yeah, follow up. Go.
Okay, just salespeople suddenly couldn't really do anything. You know, I mean, even though there was this sort of acceleration of B2B, a lot of that stuff was inbound. So that sort of the normal sales function was made much more complicated.
Yeah.
And so you really needed to move from a kind of you know, lead generation mentality to something different, which was not necessarily, I mean, it could be bottom of the funnel, but not necessarily bottom of the funnel, right? You know, but at the same time, people were putting all their money into you know, MQAs and SQLs and you know, so on and so forth.
Well, because the trade shows dried up, and then there was the panic, and so it was white papers and webinars, and
yep.
that's going to be yeah. So all right. Any other?
Yeah, I remember
Oh, go ahead.
You were
I'll chime in.
Ginny, you were having a story about like Amazon and sellers, and I was looking over my neighbor. She's a big seller on Amazon, and she was like, I could just sell direct, but Amazon has all my product and they won't give it to me. It's stuck in their fulfillment centers, and she didn't know what to do. So it was a very, it was pretty crazy.
So great. So he was one of those. I loved. There's so many amazing stories that came out of this time in human ingenuity, and I think that is one of the amazing things of this time to look back on. And so she was so great to talk to. So yes, so she sends all her stuff is made in the States, so she didn't have that challenge, but she had pre-ordered. She felt like, what if that facility gets shut down? I'm gonna order a whole bunch of inventory, and then just as that inventory was about to get wrapped up and be done in production, that's when Amazon stopped taking non-essential items. So then suddenly she had nowhere to ship it. And she said, you know, because of all my networking that I'm constantly doing, so she found a warehouse of people. I think they make auto parts, but they do their own fulfillment through Amazon. So she said, can I just ship my inventory down to you guys, and then can you process my Amazon orders? So you saw these people, you know, businesses just being flexible in ways that if you'd asked them 2 months ago if they could have pivoted their business model and fulfillment chain in 2 weeks, you know, you would have thought that's insane. There's a company here in Maine that makes a lot of the testing swabs, and so they are in massive demand, and they spun up an entirely new manufacturing plant in 3 months. You know, and I have a friend who is there, and she said, you know, that was something that was on a 3-year roadmap. and it is up running within 3 months. So it's just, and not just from a production standpoint, from what marketers are doing too, has been just really, really amazing to watch. And I think that it's going to be one of those, lifelong lessons from this.
Well, it raises the interesting question about what are our expectations now, because these things can be done. Is that going to be the new normal? That everything is super accelerated. If we did it then at this time in this time frame, can we do it now when things are, back to normal, if that ever happens?
Yeah. Okay, we have a question about with the shifts due to COVID, how can SEO and PPC pros help maximize a limited budget, which is a great question. And one of the challenges now on the PPC side is we're starting to see costs go back to their normal or even heightened levels in some scenarios. So in terms of from a paid search side, I would say looking at obviously your highest converters. I'm not sure if you're B2B or B2C or if you're selling products or services, but focusing on your sort of low-hanging fruit. But then I would also think about diversifying to less expensive new channels, like Greg just mentioned. So diversifying to whether that's, if it's Pinterest, which now they are growing, and ads are relatively inexpensive. There's going to be scale challenges there, obviously, but there's lots of ways to think about, and even within the Google ecosystem, there are less expensive avenues to go. So I would think about that.
The popular products is free. Great, that's a good reminder, Greg.
Yeah, I know. So I can't name any names, but I'm aware of a test that was done to drive calls to small business customers using sort of second tier sites. I mean, it included Apple Maps, but Bing, and a couple of others, not Facebook and not Google My Business. And they had a lot of success doing this. There was a lot of success generating phone calls to local businesses at lower cost using these sort of non-first tier channels. So that goes to the new channels experimentation standpoint. I mean, people sort of live by this 80-20 rule where they're devoting 80% of their attention to Facebook and Google, which makes sense, but it's worth going out and trying other things that are more cost effective and may work pretty well.
Yeah, and I echo that on the paid search side. Like, do not ignore Microsoft, and there are plenty of examples of sectors that see really good. There's less scale typically, but you can get really good CPAs. So I would
depends on who your client is. Scale may not be the massive issue. If it's not a huge brand, it may not be a big deal.
Right. Yeah.
This was for small businesses in my particular example.
Yeah. I would absolutely look at that. And and to Greg's point, so on the organic side now, certainly if you're in retail products, you've got free listings in Google Shopping, and then those listings can show up if you've got either your feeds and or product schema. You've got popular products. There are all kinds of places that organic product content can start surfacing on Google now. So George or Barry, any other thoughts on that?
I mean, I know a lot of SEO agencies that focus just on SEO, not on the paid side. We're trying to tell their clients, hey, SEO is a long-term thing. It's not like you just spend the money now and see the results tomorrow. It takes months and months and months. So you might not be spending your money on paid search right now. You might not be spending your money on, maybe you got, some, free months of rent or whatever it might be. Now is the time to put whatever budget you can into SEO, because when we come out of this in 6 months to a year or whatever it might be, that's when you'll see the benefit from SEO. So it's kind of like taking the long-term approach, seeing where you want to be in 6 to 12 months and trying to use the budget appropriately there.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a bunch of local stuff you can do if that makes sense for your customer. There are a lot of GMB profiles that are not fully optimized, that are not using posts, that are not engaged with Q&A, that haven't put all their photos in. So there's that stuff helps, both in terms of ranking in some cases or visibility in some cases. And it doesn't help with organic ranking. It helps in the local pack. But it also helps your customers choose you, which is ultimately where everybody wants to go. So that's a sort of a free thing, quote unquote, that if you haven't done it, you should do it.
Right. I mean, SEO in general is free. And so if you have more time and you're not focusing on certain tasks that you might have been working on before, it's about putting the time in. Google came up with so many features. I think it's on our list to talk about around, and search engines came out with so many different things over the past, several months since COVID started. A lot of those things are new schema, new structured data around COVID or around other features. Google's been really, really helpful in terms of trying to help businesses, not just by giving them free ad dollars and Microsoft giving free ad dollars around to help them, but also with different types of structured data and Google My Business features to help them along the process. So there's lots of little things you could do without spending money, but time is money. So
yeah. Well, and the Google ad grants, not ad grants, ad credits that came out for businesses that were impacted by COVID, they've ranged up to, a couple $100 up to $1,000. And so those are going to be typically for smaller budget advertisers. And so I did a piece on that and reached out to some people about how they would think about using that within the Google ecosystem, obviously. But yeah, I mean, I think it's those questions like, what are my highest margin products and or, easiest services to close deals on? And what is, like, are there targeting restrictions that I should really be looking at? And are there audiences I know? What do I know about my customers? How do I make, think about making audiences off of those, your best performers, your lifetime value customers. And then maybe search, you've got kind of covered. So YouTube can be an extremely efficient way to drive performance and not just awareness these days. So there's, I think plenty of options.
And there's also this like general, it's not specific to any one discipline, but I imagine the reason that most people are tuning in to us live right now or via the recording is because you want to learn something, and you want to learn something for free. During this period, the SEO industry, just digital marketing in general, has been super into leaning into this pivot. And there are just so many educational resources. There's so many conferences that are free or very affordable that you can just tune into and learn how to do what you're trying to do a little bit better, or see how somebody else is doing it. And that's another way that you can eventually save time, which will also save you money.
All right, so let's move to some of the other disruptions and events that we have been all kind of grappling with as well. So I don't think we can really spend an entire session. In fact, we spent 2 sessions talking about the impact of data regulation, privacy regulation, CCPA, the changes with third-party cookies that are happening and coming in Chrome. So I just want to mention it as something that this industry is going to be, on the cookie side of things, what tracking is going to look like, what targeting is going to, mechanisms are going to look like. I don't think we need to spend a whole ton of time. We do have a couple of past live with search engine lands on that, but I think it's going to be something that is going to have significant impact on how we do our business, particularly on the paid side. And Greg, if you want to comment.
I would just comment at a high, and there's also the Apple iOS 14 IDFA stuff.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of perfect storm of pressure on data, all sort of forcing people to develop first-party data sources to sort of really engage with their customers in different ways and not rely on third-party data. I don't think this is, it's funny because some of this feels like it's been intensified by coronavirus, but it's all really kind of a parallel universe that's got its own momentum. But I think none of this is going away. We've got the problems with the transatlantic. It used to be called the Safe Harbor Agreement. I forget the successor name.
Privacy Shield.
Privacy Shield. That was invalidated. Now there's all kinds of kind of chaos around how do you transfer data between Europe and the U.S. So that's related. You've got a new ballot initiative in California called I'm going to transpose CPRA, which is going to be an expansion of CCPA that will probably pass, but it's still unclear. So all of these privacy things are going to continue to happen, and this occurs against the backdrop of the seeming greater demand for personalization. I mean, there's survey after survey that says, our consumers want more personalization. They'll disregard non-personalized marketing messages, and it becomes really difficult to do that unless you have a lot of first-party data in this environment where a lot of data is under pressure or going away in some sense.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, one of the quotes that stuck with me throughout this whole period was from an early Lab of Search Engine Land on B2B, and Brad Geddes saying, the businesses that had their data in order are doing so much better than those that didn't. And I think that's just going to be, that should stick with everyone, that if your data is not in order now, make it a priority, and whether that's investing in new MarTech or what, but really, really thinking about how you're managing your customer data, making sure you're obviously doing it in a privacy compliant way, and then how you are tying it together within your systems, that you have a cohesive and strategic approach to what your data looks like.
They're flip sides. They're two sides of the same coin in a way. I mean, the inventories and the sort of investigation you have to do for CCPA compliance or privacy compliance, otherwise GDPR, if that pertains to you, gives you the ability to really get a sense of what your data is and where it lives.
Yeah. All right. Obviously, there were big implications, and I think thought-provoking discussions that are hopefully ongoing with the social values, Black Lives Matter, and movement, and in terms of other sort of social activism initiatives, we saw the Facebook ads boycott, and brands really taking a more proactive role in their activism. Perhaps we can call it self-interest in terms of brand safety concerns, but I think thinking about Black Lives Matter, I know for me it really helped sort of crystallize and sort of heighten my awareness and understanding of the challenges that we as an industry have. And I think, for me, thinking back on, when you think about like SMX planning, for years we have been so focused on the gender discrepancies and really trying to make sure that we have female representation, and I think to the detriment of thinking about ethnic and racial diversity as well. And so, I think hopefully there's going to be a lot of positives that come out of this, but what my takeaways were from having conversations and doing live Search Engine Land on this topic is that it has to be intentional, and that companies have to have it operationalized in order to make an impact. So has been extremely helpful and educational for me to dive into these topics. But and so I guess my point on the intentionality is that if we want to make this long-term and not a long-term impact and not a I put a sign in my yard or I went to a protest, is thinking about ways to operationalize these efforts within your organizations, within your teams.
There's also the aspect of like, well, all these things are happening around us, they affect our customers, and so it's on us to kind of maintain relevance. And how do you do that when people aren't thinking about shopping, or people aren't thinking about doing whatever your business happens to sell? And so when people are putting out this generic messaging, there is now this crackback that people are less and less afraid of to call out a company because it's becoming more and more common. And so even if you are the kind of company that is very deliberate, but you're also slow to respond, like CrossFit was, where they had no messaging around Black Lives Matter whatsoever in that really crucial 1 week period right after the murder of George Floyd. Subsequently after.
Yeah, and I think that, but I think George, to the point of the intentionality is, and the reason, all the evidence that shows why companies with diversity in their, either within their company or within their teams, are more high performing. I think that's perfect case in point of not having somebody say, wait a second, and within that organization.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Antitrust, we sort of touched on. That's obviously, we'll see what comes out of that. I think that report is due the end of September, perhaps, I think, from the House Committee. So we'll see what comes out of that and if any actions are recommended. So I guess we'll stay tuned. That's sort of a future-looking thing that coming out of the hearings that were last month or earlier this month. I can't even remember. And then bringing it back sort of to search, and obviously search has not run in a vacuum either. There have been algorithm updates and all kinds of other changes. So Barry, you kind of want to just touch on some of the big ones for people to
so search is always evolving, search is always changing, but some of the big announcements that came out was the page experience update that will become a ranking factor at some point next year. They didn't announce when it will happen, but they said you'll have at least 6 months notice before they announce it. So if they announce it today, it will be 6 months from today that will become a factor. So, and it's just about making sure your website is good, good user experience. So you don't have to worry much about that, and that's stuff you should be doing anyway. The May core update was pushed out. We thought as SEOs, maybe like Google would not push out a core update because it could hurt businesses, but Google's like, it can also benefit businesses. So, and we got to keep improving our search engine. We got to keep making things better and better. And that's what they did with the core update. And we're doing another core update soon. So I guess we'll be seeing one as well. And that's what a lot of people thought happened this past Monday, that all those ranking changes on Monday at around 5 p.m. were like, what's going on? What's going on with the rankings? And as we look closer, I'm like, this has to be a bug. Maybe it's not a bug. I'm not sure if it was a bug. And then Google confirmed there was some massive bug. And maybe that's because people or Googlers are working from home and they pressed the wrong button. Who knows? But we covered that story, and basically there was an indexing system failure. It basically means something broke with their index build. I guess caffeine is still being used, something that Google built 10 years ago to build a search, to build their index, something called caffeine is still being used, and something went wrong with it and it built a bad index, or a bad index, and that caused the search results to be all over the place. Google fixed it very quickly, and by I think 11:30 p.m. on Monday, everything was resolved. But it just shows you like how even big search engines can have bugs, and they had multiple bugs over the years. In fact, they even had a local bug they confirmed in early May. So it seems like, I don't know if Google's having more and more bugs, but these bugs are way more noticeable now than they were back in the old days. So yeah, I mean, just keep an eye on things. Things are constantly changing in search, especially around algorithm updates. And sometimes it's not just you, it's not you, it's something that Google did. So don't react too fast, see what the community is talking about, and don't panic.
And use those GA annotations.
Yes. Yes. Everybody, you even see today, like people are still commenting about, oh, my rankings were all over the place on Monday and Tuesday, and SEMrush says this and Moz says that. I'm like, stop looking at that Monday, Tuesday, even Wednesday date range. It just pretend it didn't happen. Just ignore it all. Because it really is.
Or look in your back end to see whatever your actual revenue source of truth is. All right.
Like, SEOs are like, why should Google be doing these updates? We have enough problems to deal with around COVID and everything. Maybe Google should just stop. And I don't know if that's the answer.
Well, all right, we are coming up on time, so let's move to our last section, what we've learned. One quick takeaway. Go, George.
I've learned from the search results page, by now it's all kind of old, but whenever you Google or Bing coronavirus, you see what a search results page can look like in the future. Given it's a quantum leap from what we're used to now for our maybe like our branded search or whatever query, but the way the coronavirus search results page looks is just such a departure from anything else we've seen before. And now we know what they can do. We know that Bing can implement like a coronavirus chat bot right on the search results page. These are future features that might be implemented. They might help businesses, they might not, but we're getting a glimpse of it.
All right, great. That's a prediction and a takeaway. Good. How about you, Greg?
So there's a lot of things here, but many of them we've already talked about. I'm struck by the sort of the cynicism that pervades kind of online media, and the fact that people have become more and more dependent on the internet. They're more dependent on it than they ever were, but there's more fraud, there's more spam, there's more disinformation than ever. So we're living in this really dissonant environment where trust is really critical. It's critical for brands, it's critical for websites, but it's harder and harder to come by, and it's hard to break through the noise. And so if you're somebody with a offline presence, leverage that as a way to establish trust bring the store online, bring more of your brand, your personality online, to overcome some of that spammy, distrustful, disinformation stuff. Not a profound observation, but
no, I think being authentic and being coordinated with your online and offline and bringing that together is a really good takeaway.
Yeah, but I've said everything else, so that was left.
But on a more positive note, I mean, if you want to be negative about everything, that's fine.
Are you accusing me of being negative of everything about everything?
No,
I don't think so.
No, I'm just joking. But I think what we've seen clearly is that people are very strong, especially in an industry. They're really good at adapting to things. They're really quick to adapt as well. I mean, SEOs and SEMs are constantly, even before this, have had the behavior of having to adapt to algorithm updates, to new features in search. And I think what really stands out in our industry is that our industry is really good at adapting to this type of stuff. We're very strong, and clearly we're getting through this okay. So keep your chin up, unlike Greg, who's always pessimistic.
Okay, I have to respond to that. Ginny. Now that we have 1 minute left. So I would say on a more optimistic note that sort of being human, this is consistent with authenticity, sort of bring the human part forward and suppress the machine part. This is what, connect with people, be real, bring your humanity forward. That's what will save the internet.
Yes.
Are you saying my message was not real? I wasn't human?
Precisely.
No, I agree. I think we saw a lot of empathy. I think understanding that, finding your voice, being, true to whatever your brand voice is makes all the sense, and don't go chasing everybody else. I think we are going to see looking ahead into Q4, I think it's going to continue to be a mixed bag. Some are going to be just absolutely see record-breaking sales. If you're in e-com, I think that you're going to continue to see great great results. I think it's going to be an extremely tough landscape for small biz, local retail, and services. But we will see. We are out of time. And thank you all so much for joining us. And we'll be taking a short hiatus and resuming live with Search Engine Land next month. So stay tuned. And in the meantime, though, you can subscribe to Search Engine Land on our YouTube channel. And you can also access all of our past episodes from the live tab on Search Engine Land. And so a reminder also to get your Search Engine Land award entries in by September 4th. We have several new categories this year, so be sure to check that out on searchengineland.com. Thank you and take care.